Sheila, good morning, good afternoon,
Good
and welcome.
morning, Gary. Good afternoon to you.
Yeah, and welcome to the bar.
I am so jealous because it's about 10:15 in the morning my time, so it's a little early to be in a bar. So I am sitting in my home office.
Today actually is day one of phase two of our coming out of our lockdown.
Oh, that's
And
fantastic.
yeah, day one but unfortunately for now, bars, restaurants, and other places are closed.
We're a little further along than you are because we're about at the in my county, because California is different depending on the counties you're in. In my county, we're close to getting into phase three, which will be the reopening of. So phase one is complete closure. Phase two is opening of retail stores, restaurants with safety precautions, some bars with not hair salons yet. That's phase three, and I can't wait.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the interesting things is that we'll be able to feed ourselves, drinks ourselves, etc. But as you can see with me, my roots really need a good show, and we won't be able to.
Mine too.
Roots. So where's home? Where exactly are you right now?
So home for me is normally United Airlines, flying all over the world, but right now I am in my actual home in Northern California. I'm halfway between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe. So I'm
Oh,
about 2 hours from San Francisco, beautiful area. I normally spend, in a period of 12 months, 5 weeks at home. So I'm going a little insane on my 10th week in a row. It's definitely not in my DNA to be stuck at home.
and I guess that's a lovely lead in to ask you a simple question of, in that 10 weeks of lockdown, have you learned anything or confirmed anything that you sort of knew?
One thing I learned was that the simple gestures in life make a big difference. Like, because I'm gone so much, I rarely ever see my neighbors. And I live on a golf course. We're a small community. There's 16 houses. I
Okay.
think five of the original builders, including myself, I built my house 20 years ago, are still here. I have met neighbors that literally have been here for 10 or 12 years I never met. And they've been really generous, knowing that I live alone. I
Hmm.
have found flowers on my front porch, eggs, milk, toilet paper. People have been very generous. So I have found that out. I've also found out I've renewed my love of cooking because I love to cook and I never get to. So I'm pulling out all my mother's old Irish recipes, and I've been having a great old time doing that.
So there's only so many times you can have cabbage and corned beef and
We
good old
never ate
Irish brown bread.
that. Well, I like the brown bread. Corned beef and cabbage we didn't have growing up. We had a lot of lamb.
Wasn't it? Isn't it extraordinary when And I was being facetious. Is that the definition often of a Irish food and Irish culture and Irish this and Irish that it's somewhere along the Atlantic. It all got confused. And you go to the strangest places. I do anyway when I travel. Oh, this is an Irish dish, and you look at it and you say, no, we never had beef and stew. It was lamb.
Exactly. We never had corned beef and cabbage. The US is where they had corned beef and cabbage. My father said he had no idea what it was the first time he saw it. It's like, well, I don't know what this stuff is.
And in terms of, obviously, that's 10. You're on your 11th week, is that right? Your
I'm
11th
on my
week.
11th week.
Okay.
I am not, let's just say I'm anxious to start traveling. I am more of a one-on-one person. I love
Yeah.
being in front of people. I love presenting at conferences. I like that interaction.
Yeah.
I am finding out it is not in my DNA to be stuck at home.
Okay. Okay. But still, I guess ultimately, this is not the norm. This is going just
No.
the current norm.
Yeah.
And have you already, and this is a question I don't have the answer for, already have you had a significant number of invites for people to welcome you back to places? Because obviously we're still in this quarantine, not quarantine
Right.
type of a phase. Are you seeing activity this side of Christmas? Because a lot of people in Europe are saying, you know, oh, we're just going to wipe out 2021 or 2020 for that type of stuff.
No, I am seeing it. I mean, I have been invited to speak at a number of conferences that are on the schedule from now till the end of the year. Now, some of those obviously have turned into virtual.
Yeah.
And so it's the beginning of each month, I sort of assess, all right, is this trip going to happen? So my trips to Ireland, the UK, Australia, Singapore in April, May, June got canceled. My next trip was supposed to be back to Ireland for a board meeting in July. That's now been changed to a virtual meeting. Right now, the next trip is scheduled for end of July back to Australia to present at a conference and to work with some of my clients. We'll see at the beginning of July whether that's not going to happen. But no, I certainly am still getting invites, and they start out as, we hope they'll be in person, but they may end up being virtual. We do have tickets to the US Open tennis tournament in New York in September. Not quite sure that one's going to happen.
Okay. Yes, they seem to be talking a lot about the competitions might go ahead, but the amount of people in the stands might be reduced. Why? Because they don't want to give back all the money to the TV stations.
Exactly.
So it's extraordinary, you know. And again, you and I probably spoke about it, is that when we find ourselves in this situation, it brings out the very best, as you've already said, the very best in people, where they're actually saying, caring about another person. But it also then brings out quite the worst in people on other ways. And I guess you're an extraordinary woman, I must say. Why do I say that? Apart from the fact that you're Irish, so all
you're biased.
That's the first thing. But the second thing is, you're such an optimistic person. I've never met you in any shape, form, or time of day where you haven't had the smile and the optimism and started with a how's it going? What's going on with your day? And yet you live in a world that some people would wake up every morning and not get out of bed, because behind all of this change and behind all this transition and behind all this industrial revolution 4.0 that's driven by data, and without it, is, what are you doing with the data? What's your intentions with the data? And you and I laughed once when people, lazy journalists, like I say, data is the new oil. If it was only that simple. If only it was that simple. So with all that's going on with the dependency on remote working, with Zoom and all the other things, there's an awful lot of data being aggregated. And for me, I just look at the headlines: 20% increases, 2 years of digital transformation. You probably look at 2 years lacking in policies and protection, one suggests.
I absolutely do. I mean, and I appreciate that, because I definitely have been staying positive through all this. And I have found out that people who have been very negative during this, I really don't want to be around. It's not the end of the world. We're going to get through this. We have to look forward to it. I am certainly concerned from a privacy perspective of all the new technologies that's coming out, the tracking devices, or some of the big social media companies wanting to get involved in collecting personal health information to help. You know, I understand in some ways COVID-19 is very serious, and we need to do research and development of vaccinations and testing and that type of thing. I get it. But the sheer lack of concern about privacy is really very, I don't want to say intriguing, but very frustrating to me. Because as I've said to many companies, COVID-19 should not be used as a guise for developing new technology and having COVID-19 as a new revenue generator. Okay. You need to think about what data you're collecting. Why are you collecting it? I understand that organizations want to protect their employees. You want to take temperatures when you come in to make sure it's safe to enter the building. You don't need to store that data. Why do you need a device to store temperatures of employees? So companies that are investing in new technologies, whether they're developing them or utilizing them, have to have an exit strategy. What are you going to do with that data when we're out of COVID-19?
Mm.
What's the secondary use of that data? How long are you going to store it? Who's going to have access to it? You know, there's a lot of questions that aren't being asked. So, you know me, I get on my high horse, my passion about privacy. We
Yeah.
need to think about what we're doing.
Yeah. And I guess that leads into um, unintended consequences of positive intent. So what you're
Exactly.
saying is the intentions are so right and so honorable and so correct, but so is sort of planting trees to save the bees until you realize that they're not indigenous species, so those trees are killing the bees.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, it goes to what we talked about before, Gary,
Yeah.
the moral and ethical use of that data. You know, even though you mean well, because having information can lead to better diagnosis, better testing, better vaccinations, it can help get us out of this pandemic. But what is really the moral and ethical use of that data behind the scenes? What is it that we don't know that companies are doing with that data? Because the more data you have, the more opportunities you have to use that data for secondary purposes. And that's when you run into privacy issues. You weren't transparent about that.
Okay, and is that the key thing for you? Is that if there's no problem in doing these things for the right reasons and document it and all the rest, but once it's finished and the purpose of what you were storing it for, you genuinely should just hit the delete button. Gone.
That's that's certainly that's one of my biggest concerns. My probably if I had to put it into one word, it would be transparency. That whole lack of transparency around why the data is being collected, what it's being used for, whether or not it's being anonymized, what are the ramifications for keeping that data, like the whole contact tracing or tracking apps. What are you going to do with that data when it's through? So I understand that
Yeah.
if you
Okay.
have employees and you have employees that are exposed to COVID, you want to notify them, right? So what happens when we're out of COVID? What are you going to use that data for? There's so many opportunities to abuse that data.
Mm,
That's where I become concerned. So
mm.
that needs to be the forefront of the development of these apps, is the whole life cycle of privacy from the time you collect it to the time you destroy it. What are you going to do with it?
But if I was to suggest that what you talk about is like a very interesting book, this is just like a very consistent chapter within this book that has accelerated a lot of what you've been talking about for a long time into a condensed period of time. And now, if I understand
Absolutely.
correctly, is you're suggesting that some of the smog around the whole thing is being used as a screen for
Mhm.
some companies to use it as the opportunity to sort of have a look or test or whatever. And how then, when it's finished, when the smog clears, let's call it, continue with the analogy, who is going to ask the questions, in your opinion?
So I think it's going to be up to the privacy officers in the organizations to ask those questions. The regulators are going to ask those questions because they're already asking the questions. One of the things, even though, we talk about, or in your chats, you talk about 3 words. I'm not going to use my 3 words, but yet, but what I would say is privacy still matters. And that's something that regulators have been talking about, is that you can't throw privacy obligations out the window under the guise of COVID. You just can't.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's such an emotional thing as well, is that when you're bleeding out, you want someone to put something on very quickly and tell you you're going to be all right.
Exactly.
And we,
Exactly. And that's a great analogy. And
yeah,
and I'm not saying that any of these apps are bad.
yeah,
What I have a concern about is that when COVID is being used as a next revenue generator, since GDPR, everyone sort of generated a lot of money off of that. And now they need the next thing. And
yeah,
COVID seems to be a convenient next thing.
yeah. And can I ask you, you mentioned two places a lot when we talk. One is Ireland, obviously, and the other is Australia. You spend a bit of time quite a bit of time down there.
I do.
And one of the countries that, and obviously because she's a female and she's a good Irish name as well, is New Zealand. They seem to be, and she seems to be coming out as a very exemplar for how to do things in the right order and the right people. for the right reasons. How's Australia doing in that regard? Are you getting a good sense?
So I also spend a lot of time in New Zealand as well.
Oh, do you?
And I
Okay.
happen to agree with you. She's fantastic. And of course, the added cherry on the top is that she's Irish. So that makes it even better.
Absolutely.
But,
that's the only reason. We don't talk about anybody else doing anything right or wrong.
The Irish are brilliant. And we're so shy too. But Australia, I can tell you, Australia is a little bit behind New Zealand, but Australia is doing well. They never had the restrictions as much as we did in the U.S. or in Europe. They closed restaurants and bars. They asked people to work from home, but there wasn't a mandatory work from home.
Okay.
Their hairdressers never closed, which I wanted to fly to Australia just get my hair done. I was so frustrated. Schools only closed for like 3 weeks. So they're still in a phased approach, and they're still locked down the borders. You can't travel internationally.
Yeah.
But they are doing much better, I think, than we are.
But it's been an extraordinary social experiment, or a subset social experiment, an awful way for all of us to arrive at where we've arrived with this invisible enemy, I think it's being called. And yet, when we look back, and even this morning I was talking to some people and they said, well, I'm not sure I'm ever going to get another opportunity to spend 12 weeks with my 5-year-old or 7-year-old or my nephew or anything. So I think the only way you can look back at these things is to say, okay, well, it was out of my control. Because there's a lot of people beating themselves up and saying, oh, what I could have done differently. And it goes back to sort of Einstein saying that, worrying about stuff that's outside of your control and consistently doing the same thing over and over to try and change it is going to get you to go mad around the head.
Exactly.
You just, certain things are out of your control. And so your 3 words, non-technical now.
Mine are not technical.
No acronyms, because I know I think you're an acronym-free zone, aren't you, actually?
I definitely am. And believe it or not, my 3 words have nothing to do with privacy. So that would shock you. So my 3 words, can you see it? Appreciate simple gestures.
It's not so beautiful.
And I think that's what I have learned during this, is that the simple gestures of a neighbor bringing you flowers and leaving them on your porch, or looking out your window and seeing a friend you haven't seen in 2 years dropping off a basket full of eggs, bread, toilet paper, just the basic necessities of life. You just learn to appreciate that. I have no desire to go back to the malls to go shopping. I just have a desire to get on an airplane and come back to Ireland. But other than that.
But it's wonderful that because in this series that we've been doing, nobody, and this is our 20s, whatever, has said, I need a new car. I need a new dress. I need a new this, that, the other. Most of the stuff is smile every day, or laugh every day, or appreciate small things.
Yeah.
But that's just human nature, I guess, that it's given us a chance to slow down. But you know what, Sheila? As always, we didn't rehearse anything. As always, we just let it go and had a chat. You're a wonderful exemplar for positive thinking.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
You are. You're a wonderful, and as I said earlier, you're in a subject matter that, should you desire, you could be very specific and very, but you like telling stories, you like bringing people along, you like to get them to think that they're the smartest person in the room because they've got you in the room. I guess that's your whole mantra, right? And thank you as always.
It all comes down to being Irish. We love to tell stories.
Have we said that once or twice on this call? Listen, we can't wait to see you in person. Thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you.
We'll see you very soon.
Hopefully.